Okay, I'm here with Tony. And first, Tony, do you want to like tell me, I guess, how you even found me, or
Yeah.
like what led you to contacting me?
Yeah, I'm working on a project that is requiring me to do a bunch of research, and the main character in this research project happens to be a psychopath. And so I started looking online, and I found a really amazing interview on psychopathy is. They're in four parts, and it was you, and you talked about your book, and it was really, really amazing. The interview even on psychopathy is, but it led me to the book that I read just almost cover to cover in, I think it was like 48 hours. I couldn't put it down. It was incredible.
Oh,
And
thank you, Tony. I
yeah,
appreciate you. Real quick, psychopathy is it psychopathyis.org? I think it is.
yeah,
I always like to promote them. They're
yeah.
like the only people who seem to care. And so if they have like a bunch of great resources, they have little tests, diagnostic tools. They have a list of providers who are willing to provide treatment for people who are psychopaths or psychopath adjacent. In fact, I just had man, what do we say? I'm on the advisory board. So we had an advisory board annual kind of meeting. And one of the people was like, I've been thinking about this recently because I was on vacation just recently, and you know how like your mind wanders. She said, I don't use the word psychopath because I use the word person with psychopathy. And I think I was the only one on the advisory board there, at the meeting. There are other people, but I think I was the only one in the advisory board with psychopathy, I guess, the way she's like using it. And I kind of thought, is it like offensive to say psychopath versus person with psychopathy? And I thought, probably not, because I mean, like, at least the way I experience it, the psychopathy is like you have such a low, kind of weak sense of self that, like, I mean, people could call me all sorts of things. I'm just kind of, and I'm bad with this with other people too. I'll be like, oh, that person I think is, like that person's deaf or whatever. And I don't know, are you not supposed to call people deaf? Maybe, maybe they're people with hearing disabilities, or maybe they feel like no, deaf is their identity. So it is kind of tricky to kind of keep up with them, but I thought that was that was kind of funny to like be concerned about that with a personality disorder that is characterized by not identifying with anything. Is like be careful not to identify them as psychopaths.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, to
Or people who are
dehumanize
not
them.
easily offended by anything.
Yes,
Like,
exactly. Yes.
are you
It's like
offended by this? No, actually, I'm not offended by nothing.
this is like a little bit of a tangent, but I often wonder, there are a lot of people out there like, oh, don't ever do, call this person that or whatever. And I often wonder if the group that they're protecting actually cares,
Yeah.
yeah. You wonder like, oh, is it a thing, or are they not offended? One time I was just in like really podunk Alaska, like I think the population during the winter is like, I don't know, 400 people in this like little peninsula or whatever. And I was just like killing time to wait till the weather improved. And I was talking to this woman. She was like explaining all of like, actually, if you call me Inuit, that doesn't make sense because this or whatever. And I was like, I'm hearing this, but I'm also not retaining what the correct the correct word is. Like I still don't kind of remember it. Unfortunately, I should have like taken better notes or something. But yeah, it is tricky to
Mhm.
kind of keep track of everything. But so I usually ask a question like, "What is it like to be you?" Right. So keep that in mind. And also, you asked me a question, and so I'll just let you talk about both of those.
I did. I did. I asked, I wanted to know if, because I don't think I'm a psychopath. I haven't taken the full-on huge test, but I'm pretty sure I'd score pretty low, even though I feel like I have the ability to reach into that zone every once in a while. That said, I felt like there are parts of what I was reading in your book that are definitely like superpowers. And I wanted access to that. And I wanted to learn how to I wanted psychopath lessons. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to learn how to be, because I feel like I'm neurotic. And I thought, if I thought to myself when I was reading this book, if this person's brain chemistry was offered as a dietary supplement, I'd like sign up for like a subscription dietary like delivery of
Hmm.
this, because to be able to have that at will would be incredible. Because I feel like as a kind of a neurotic person, I'm very self-conscious. And what I found interesting about your book is that you seem to have a complete lack of self-consciousness. You seem completely immune to the opinions that others have of you. And that to me is incredible. And I was like, I want, maybe if I talk to this person and learn how she thinks and how she perceives the world, that would help inform me to, I don't know, be less,
Be less.
be less concerned by, yeah, be less, self-conscious in certain
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah, and I have a friend, Anne, actually from the book, who's always trying to get me to write a how to be a sociopath psychopath book. But I am kind of like writing a little bit of a book that's like that. Working title now is How to Be a Good Psychopath or The Good Psychopath. That's the
Oh,
if
uh-huh.
people have preferences, they can let me know if one's better than another. But yeah, because I'll tell you kind of why I think um, everything has kind of trade-offs, right? I think that's one thing that I've learned in life. And before therapy, like kind of around the time I was writing the book, let's say, people would often ask me, "Hey, if you could stop being a psychopath, would you?" And I think that it's important to address my answers at that moment were like, yeah, I would, because it's like I lived this life, however many decades, as a psychopath, and it would just be interesting, it would satisfy my novelty seeking to live life not as a psychopath, right? And so that was like my answer at that time. That would have been like, I mean, the book is going to, in 2023, it's going to celebrate, I guess, its 10th anniversary. So almost like 10 years ago or around that time. That's kind of what I
Well,
was.
I was
Hmm?
late to the party.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny too. Well, we don't need to go down that thing. It is kind of funny though, just sometimes how certain things seem like criticized when they come out or whatever, and then like later people like them. Like I remember Very Brady sequel got panned by the
Uh,
critics, and I love it.
I didn't see that. I'm writing that.
Yeah.
Very.
Also, Adam's Family Values. I think those are the two campy sequels that are actually better than the original, both based on TV shows.
I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, both great ones. Christina Ricci, wow,
Oh
in Adam's Family
yeah.
Values. You see, and then
Yeah.
everybody kind of recognizes her, and like Angelica Houston was in it. You're like, actually, that was a good movie. It was people just loved to hate on it at the time, though, and I think yeah, people love to hate on the book. I think a little bit more at the time, and whatever. But so, like there are trade-offs with everything, like is it good to be a psychopath? Yeah, in certain instances. And that's why I think, really a society that has psychopaths has an advantage, right? Because it is better to be a psychopath in certain instances, right?
Mhm.
And it's better to be not a psychopath in other instances. Like everything has its trade-offs. So I think it's like really important to just kind of say this, and if people like what ends up happening, I think, with like psychopathy, actually people can become neurotic eventually with it. And I'll tell you kind of how I see it develop in certain people. Usually it's the successful psychopaths who become neurotic because they I talked about this, I think, in the book. You take so many of your thoughts that are subconscious and you force them into like conscious thought to where you're controlling them. You're kind of orchestrating everything that's happening. So you're taking all this information and you're like, okay, you're not just kind of like here's what my girlfriend said about sex yesterday. She said that men think about it all the time, but women think about it just as much, but they're not kind of as aware that they're thinking about it. It wasn't like, oh, this is a sexual thought. Instead, they're thinking about sex, but they're kind of thinking more in the frame of I'm constantly looking for the person who's going to be a good partner, provider for the children that we might bear, right? So just kind of from a different angle or whatever. So So psychopaths are more like men. They're like explicitly thinking of people in terms of like, what can this person give me, provide me, what's the nature of this relationship, and just being kind of really explicit about it. And I think normal people tend to have those same thoughts, but they're more like the women thinking about sex, where it's like it's kind of buried under multiple layers of down or whatever. So yeah, so once you're forcing all those thoughts kind of into your conscious mind, like that's really taxing the CPU of your brain. It's hard to kind of process all that stuff. You have these, I've said it before, like these Excel spreadsheets of information that you're just constantly updating, and then like running and rerunning the calculations about what's happening. So you can kind of see as your brain dies, like mine has mostly died. Like I no longer have that level of brain power to be doing things. Then it kind of turns into neuroses because you're trying to control so much that really isn't controllable. But like that's kind of the only way that you've learned to exist, is to have these Excel spreadsheets. And so I think it can be a little bit miserable. So there are, just like there are kind of things that can happen from a normal brain, based on different, like age or whatever else that's happening. There are things that are kind of bad for psychopaths too. That's why I think, psychopaths like could all probably benefit from like therapy and different things to try to, like, everybody has maladaptive thinking patterns, right? Like that's probably a very safe thing to say. And everybody can do better by kind of taking those maladaptive thinking patterns and changing them, and or just becoming bilingual. Like you can keep that thinking pattern and use it when it works, and you can learn a new thinking pattern and apply it instead in different situations. So I feel like, for instance, like one of the ways that I have dealt with like my tendencies to be a little bit neurotic is to I've done like 10 minutes of meditation a day, and I always like to just follow somebody else's formula. So I always tell people too, like the exact thing that I'm doing, so they can follow it like an itinerary, like, 1.5 hours to Jasper, right? So I always use the Calm app, and it's the daily trip with, I think Jeff Warren is the meditating guy. And I like him because he's like bipolar and ADHD or whatever. So he gets it. When it comes to like, brains that are kind of like can be a little bit janky or whatever. So I do that, and that kind of like takes things down a little bit. That helps to actually just focus a little bit, because I wake up with like all these thoughts going on in my head, and then I do the meditation, and then I can be like, oh, the most important thought is this. And so now I can kind of act on that. So yeah, that's the book, right, that I'm writing, because it's like, well, psychopaths have certain issues uh, about that kind of stem in some way from their personality disorder and the way it manifests in their life, but also normal people do. But the real truth is there's kind of like this middle ground, like that helps psychopaths, but it also helps normal people. So you said like it seems like psychopaths don't seem to care what other people think about them, right? They're kind of like,
Yeah, that's what I kind of got. I noticed from some of the things that you said in your book where, yeah, it seemed like you did not have self-conscious. Like
hmm
you could walk onto a stage and deliver an unrehearsed public speech to 3,000 people and not even bat an eyelash.
yeah.
Like you'd have the exact same level of anxiety that I have when I go to the grocery store. Um, and I was like, that's incredible. That's a superpower. I yeah.
Yeah. So I do think that, and then remind me, I want to ask you, when you tap into it, what does it look like? So I think that does kind of come from like this like lack of sense of self, right? That's what I mean kind of by trade-off. So if you have like a very weak sense of self, then you're not really taking like what my therapist used to call identity hits. Like if somebody says, "Hey, ugly," to me, I'm like, "What?" You know, am
Uh-huh.
I like parked in the wrong place or whatever? Or, like I'm not necessarily like triggered immediately. And actually, I was just listening to, I am guilty of this too, kind of mislabeling these videos.
Oh, uh-huh.
So the video I was watching was like, and I haven't, in fairness, I haven't finished the video yet, a YouTube video, where it's like how to avoid kind of being triggered, by other people, like how to just be able to stop. And I haven't heard yet them say the thing that is how to avoid it. But like psychopaths generally are not triggered
Hmm.
by people attacking their identity because they themselves do not identify with the identity. So
Yeah.
it would be like your great 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 grandmother was a whore, and I'm like, maybe, like it's so far
Yeah.
removed from
Yeah.
who you think you are,
Yeah.
right? That you're
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
Hmm.
Like, was she good at it?
Yeah.
Was she like very, sought after in her chosen profession? Like, versus somebody calls you a, whore, or, like your mom a whore or something, like it's closer to you in terms
Hmm.
of identity. And so that, I think that's always like a good way to describe it is like, you probably don't even know who your great 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 grandmother is, right? I think most people don't,
Yeah.
right? Don't know anything about it. So it's like whatever, or like some random country in the world is doing this, and you're like, does this affect me or something? So you're kind of not identified with it, and that's why it doesn't trigger you. So the superpower kind of comes from, a place of like deep psychological dysfunction because like normal people have like a sense of self,
Hmm.
and psychopaths no, because it's a personality disorder. All personality disorders affect, like your personality, your identity, your sense of self, the way that you kind of interact with that sense of personality in the world. And all of them have dysfunction
Yeah.
with that. And then our dysfunction happens. It's kind of like, man, is it Henrietta Sacks? I think, who, I forget what was the deal with her blood. She had special blood that was like cured cancer or something.
Wow, really?
She had a disorder, but it was like her blood and whatever was so valuable. There's like that whole book, a nonfiction book about her, and about her. She was never compensated, nor her family compensated for all like her body basically contributed to science because she just naturally had like a particular kind of dysfunction or variation to whatever was happening that was just so useful. Uh, yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm reading here the Hela cell line, uh,
Oh,
with a with the first immortalized human cell line and one of the most important cell lines in medical research. That's incredible.
I
Wow, I
think it
didn't
is
know that.
that one. I think it's the
Yeah,
same cell
yeah,
line. Yeah, immortal cell
yeah.
line. Yeah, she has this thing that like just it naturally reproduces or whatever, immortal. Yeah, I think that's the deal. So that's her, and so it's like something that's a dysfunction for her,
Mhm.
but is like so useful. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing. Now, like a true like to be self-actualized. Let's say this because I think that, I mean, that's kind of like what I'm thinking about with this like next book is like, well, psychopaths can become self-actualized, and in fact, I think in some ways it's easier for them to focus on it than normal people because they have no sense of self. And once you add the self, then you're like just you're starting. You don't have any bad habits, You can just you haven't picked up garbage along the way or whatever. Probably not as much as normal people. So I think once they get the self, it's probably easier for them to self-actualize because it's like, as you say, they have the fearlessness, they have the like sense that they're not going to, conform to social norms rather than just be themselves or whatever. So this like kind of fearless ability to be yourself, 100% yourself in 100% of situations, I think is like, I mean, is that actually, I should pause. Is that what you want, or do you want to just kind of like learn some tips and tricks about how to?
I'd like kind of, I'd like to see how can I see the world a little bit more like you, you know?
Mm,
Um, I feel like you're able to take more risks socially because you're not attached to the outcome in any way.
yeah.
And I think that I learn better by seeing but I think when someone's speaking about something like that, I think that I could see it in my mind just to get an idea of like, you know, what goes through your mind in certain social situations where most people have some anxiety, and I feel like I have an excess of anxiety.
Right. Okay,
You know?
so we'll talk about both. We'll talk about the thing that you're asking more directly, and then we'll talk about self-actualization maybe later or in a different. Because I hope this was going to be, a series or whatever. We'll keep chatting and see how you improve or don't improve or
You can give me
yeah. Hopefully, yeah,
assignments
you
and
can
go out in
take
the
like
world
notes,
and
yeah, and be
test
like,
myself.
yeah, here's what I've been exactly. Here's what
Yeah,
I've been doing well at, and here's what I'm struggling with, and we can just kind of
yeah.
keep these lessons going.
Sure, I would love that. That would be great.
Yeah, so
By the way, I wanted to mention, I thought one of the best lines, I wrote it down. One of my favorite lines in your book was that you were describing yourself and you said you dispose of people once their burden exceeds their utility. And
yes.
I thought that was a really eloquently written sentence. I was like, wow, that really makes sense to me.
Yeah, so I forget which philosopher talks about people being like instrumental. It might be, I don't know why I think it's Socrates. If I'm stupid, then I'm stupid, stupid brain.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right, but like yeah, people instrumental in the sense that they're basically just tools for to lead to something else, right? And we think of a lot of people in instrumental ways, even though we can be very nice and polite, there's no reason why we would engage with them otherwise. For instance, our dentist, although my dentists are my cousins, so I
Yeah.
do see them, even when it's not for dentistry or whatever. But yeah, we see people, I mean, we naturally do. And I don't think that that's anything to be like ashamed of. Like we even have days in which we celebrate seeing people for their particular role, like Mother's Day or Father's Day, right? Like
Yeah.
we do expect mothers to do particular things. We do expect fathers to do particular things, and children like seek them out for
Mhm.
those particular roles. It's a very, at least part of it is very instrumental. Like the kid is like, what can this parent do for me? And the parent is like, has consented, I guess, to fill that role, has desired and wanted to do it. So there are a lot of instances in which people really are just like, yeah, I am your Uber driver, like my role in your life is to take you to the place that you want to go from the place you currently are. So
Mhm.
I think that one thing is to kind of just be like, that's okay. It's okay to kind of have like in your mind, like these people, this is what I need this person to be in my life. And if they're consenting to like fill that role, then that's fine. That's like when you hire an employee, I need you to show up at 9. I need you to do X. I need you to like follow up with Y. Like everybody kind of does that to a certain extent. Um, in all sorts of different situations, right? So I think that is kind of like one thing that I think we have gotten away from. It's okay to be polite to people, but it's also okay to just be like, no, I do have this expectation of you, and you did say that you would do it, and to kind of like go ahead and fulfill this role. Or if you don't, if you're not gonna willing to fulfill the role anymore, then I will just find someone else who is.
Right.
I think that that is okay to do in a lot of different situations. The kind of the second thing is like, okay, you see people, that's based on the quote that you just read me. The other
Mhm.
one is, the way I used to be is super outcome oriented. So I'd be like, and that naturally leads to seeing people as tools. Like if you're like, I need to get from point A to point B, like one time, I think I talk about this in the book, I like lost my car in a snowdrift in a blizzard because I suck
Mhm.
at driving in the snow. And then the cop picked me up and then dropped me off at a gas station and was like, "You need to stay the night in this hotel and get your car the next day." And I was like, "Nah, I'm not doing that." so, so
Uh-huh.
I was like, I'm still gonna make it to my friend's house or whatever. Anne, again, it was Anne's house or whatever. So I just like, as a truck driver was like pulling out of the gas station, I flagged him down. I stopped. I stood in front and was like, flagged him down and was like, "Hey, are you going this direction? Can you take me to whatever this exit?" And he was like really surprised because he's like, this is dangerous, right? Like I'm a good person, but most people aren't, or whatever, right? But like all I could think about kind of in the moment is just like, okay, here's my outcome that I'm trying to reach, which is to reach this particular city, to go be with my friend. And so I'm just kind of like, whatever things people, tools, or whatever I need, I'm just going to use those people. If as long as they consent, it's not like he said, "No, I'm not taking you," to kind of get what I want. So I think that's one thing. Is just I think like another way to put it is like, don't be afraid to ask for what you want, and don't be afraid to kind of just like keep an outcome goal. Like if the outcome goal really is important to you, then that kind of single-mindedness about achieving the goal is really important because you kind of two reasons. Number one is you're like just constantly grinding, I guess, or like you see everything in terms of this goal. Like, is this thing gonna lead me to the goal? No, then like let's try a different thing, because I was like, I think this is pre-Uber. I thought, so how else can I get to this place? The cop's telling me to stay in the hotel, and maybe I'll do that, but first let's see if I can just keep, doing this. And it reminds me, this is what I sometimes tell my students too. Have you seen like in football, American football, these running backs who they have the football and they're running the ball, right? And there's like 3 or 4 people hanging off them, but they just keep moving their feet.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and they just
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
moving forward and they keep
Yeah.
gaining more and more yardage. And you're like, how are they able to do this or whatever? They have like a little bit of momentum, but they
Uh-huh.
just kind of keep moving their feet. So this
Uh-huh.
idea of like keep moving your feet and don't be afraid. But the other one is like if you're so hyper focused on the goal, then you are not going to be focused on what you look like.
Right.
Like I cared zero what the trucker thought of me. He could have
Uh-huh.
thought that I was like whatever. But I think that normal people might think, hey, what is the trucker going to think of me?
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
And the answer kind of is, that's the nice thing about kind of extreme situations. And this is why I wanted to follow up with you, ask you about this question, is because one thing I've noticed is that people do seem to tap into that mentality, which is a very common psychopathic mentality, although it's not only a psychopathic mentality. They do seem to tap into that, I'm hyper focused on my outcome goal in like kind of extreme situations, like
Mhm.
emergencies or whatever else. And then suddenly it's like they, all like everything just like narrows and like all they're like thinking about is like this one particular thing as they're trying to avoid the danger or they're trying to, rescue someone or whatever else it is. You hear people talk about like these kind of situations where it's like they're just so single minded about the thing that they like everything else falls away. So this is a good place to pause and be like, when do you feel like you kind of access that mentality in which you really don't care about what other people thinking and you're just kind of in this like, this is what's happening.
Yeah, in emergency situations, like any kind of crazy emergency situation, I feel like of my social circle, family, everything, I trust myself in emergency more than anyone else. And I tend to really take charge, and I want to be the one in charge of that stuff. One example of that I can bring up here is I had a close friend of mine die suddenly,
Mm,
and all the people surrounding in our social circle, family, friends of his, all of this kind of were in what you would do in a a sudden death situation is everyone's panicking. And I just kind of went into what I sometimes refer to as robot mode.
hmm
And I just kind of like, I had to take care of everything. I had to go, I had to talk to the coroner. I had to talk to the mortician. I had to talk to the people that were doing the cremation. I had to set up, funeral arrangement. I'm not the family though, but I
hmm
took over all of this stuff immediately and put my grieving to the side.
Right.
Completely. Like I was not feeling any of that. I wasn't thinking of it, wasn't doing it, and I got a ton of stuff done in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
And that's not typical of me in other situations. Sometimes I'm second guessing myself. I'm questioning if I'm making the right decision. What are people going to think if I do it this way? And none of that came into my mind whatsoever. I was 100%, black and white and didn't give a shit.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of like how so I think your question, does this sound right, is like how are you able to tap into it in that situation and why can't you just tap into it basically on demand?
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. which is why I thought, like kind of getting an idea of the thought processes that go on in your mind. And in normal people situations where they'd have anxiety, for instance, I kind of wanted to know what goes on in your mind before a job interview.
Uh-huh.
What's because I have a feeling like you don't see things or feel things the same way a normal person would.
Yeah, so I mean, I do kind of hear what you're saying, and it's funny because like this uh ability to kind of shut out non-helpful thoughts
Yeah,
is
yeah.
like really common in all performance-based anything, right? So I mean, there's a book, I never read it, but I feel like I understand the gist, which is The Inner Game of Tennis, right? Which is talking about it. And like I once heard a golfer say that, or like I think I read it, it was a quote from a golfer that said like the best way for him or her to golf was to focus on something like really extraneous and kind of just pour all his or her attention into that particular thing. So he thinks, for instance, about like his right pinky toe, right? And then just
Hmm.
this like, so into that right pinky toe. And that kind of pushes the other thoughts out so that he's able to just like hit without being like extra tense or like worried about like, am I not this, am I not that, right? Because you need that kind of like all high performance situations require kind of a relaxed focus
Uh-huh.
mode, which it
Uh-huh.
sounds like you were in with the getting all the arrangements made for your friend's sudden demise, right? So a lot of it is kind of just like changing your focus. I think for a psychopath, the focus is always just kind of on the outcome. So you're just kind of like, if I were golfer or something, then I'd be like, okay, it's going into the green or whatever, and I'd just be like, I don't even care if it takes like 5 strokes, it's going in the hole, you know. So I don't know that's probably not a good golfer. I wouldn't be a good golfer, but I probably would be a good, for instance, if there was such a thing. I guess there is female uh, American football, but not really successful. Like I would probably be
It's
good,
a,
a
it's
good
a,
running back or something, or a good,
yeah.
somebody who also just you need just kind of that dogged determination. So like that is kind of like the thing is like psychopaths, they have like attentional issues is probably a good way to put it, where they can hyper focus and compartmentalize in ways that are kind of like, like hurt their relationships, right? Like I've talked
Mhm.
about
Yeah.
my psychopath girlfriend who, like, when we were first seeing each other, we would always have to fly to each other, and she would text me and be like, "What are you wearing? I don't remember what you look like." And I'm
Yeah.
kind of like, pull up a photo, like what
Yeah.
like, but I always was just like, yeah, she is kind of whatever, hyper focused on one thing or another, and that's easy for the psychopaths to do. And then honestly, to like get to that point, I probably would think, like you'd have to read it like a book like The Inner Game of Tennis or something, one of these books. But I also think yeah, focusing on the pinky toe is a good one. Sometimes people outcome focus is a good one, but outcome focus doesn't work for everything. So I would say like the other thing that I think is really good, and ever since I have acquired a stronger sense of self, I've had to actually relearn how to do this because once I got a stronger sense of self, then I was getting identity hits and I was kind of thinking a little bit more about like what other people thought of me, and it was harder for me to do to kind of get back in that psychopathic mindset. So what I just switched to, and I think it's like a good overall life switch, is I switched to a process orientation. So like if for instance I am let's take for instance like getting to my friend's house, through the blizzard. Process orientation might have been more like I'm going to do my best to get there, and things take the time that they take, and eventually I will get there, or I can just enjoy the journey or something. That would be like the way I would look at
Uh-huh.
it now. So I probably wouldn't have with that process orientation. Maybe I would. Maybe I would have tried at least one or two truckers, flagged them down or something. but I wouldn't have been so hyper focused on like I need to have this in order to be okay. I need to have like to be in the city with my friend in order to be okay, which before it was like all I could think about is like, no, I'm not going to think about anything else until this is done. You can see how like life is weird when you're so hyper focused on like whatever it is that has like captured your attention. So I think that's another good one. So speaking about like talking to somebody or talking to a big group of people without having prepared, public speaking. My process orientation would be like, well, I know certain things, and I will just share what I know, and doing my best is all I can do, and then people can choose to do whatever they want with it, and that's up to them. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's yeah, it's kind of exactly what I thought. I think, yeah, like I'm curious what happens in your mind. I remember you mentioning something about when you were in high school, or looking back at other people in high school and thinking about their descriptions of what it was like and how miserable it seemed to you. If you didn't
Yeah.
have any of that experience, like when you were dating in high school or college, like what was that like when you met someone you were attracted to or wanted to date? Uh, what's going on in your mind specifically? Because most people would be they. I remember being nervous, not sure what to do. You didn't seem to. I mean, describe that. What it's like to not feel anything.
Yeah. So, okay. So, in a dating situation, again, like back in the day, like a decade or so ago, I would be so kind of hyper focused on the outcome. I'd be like, this person is going to, be interested. And the truth is, though, did it always happen? No. But
Mhm.
then I would just like whatever move on. It's more like I didn't have hurt feelings
Uh-huh. Yeah,
about the
yeah,
whatever
yeah.
rejection. And since I didn't have hurt feelings about it, I didn't fear the rejection, right?
Right.
So I'd be like, I'm just going to put 100% of myself into this, right? And like try to get this person to be into me. And often it was successful, honestly, because if you're able to put like 100% of yourself into something, like people really respond well to
Right.
that,
Yeah.
tend to
Uh-huh.
respond well. Whereas if you're like insecure and you're kind of holding
Yeah.
back or like waiting to text them back or whatever, like that's what they deal with on the regular. I think my my understanding of the world is that most people treat them that way, and so they're kind of like it's not unusual. But for the to feel like a psychopath is coming after you, it feels really special because it is different. Like it
Mhm.
really does seem like somebody's coming after you 100%. In ways that you're not used to. And so you're like, often can be like, wow, this seems real or this seems intense is,
Uh-huh.
is a
Yeah.
common one that you kind of get.
Uh,
So, and then, yeah, like there are plenty of people, plenty of crushes I had that were like, nah, multiple
uh.
times.
What goes on in your brain when you get that? When someone's like, nah, and then
Well,
what do you tell yourself? Like, oh, okay, this is over.
I just understand like I'm playing a numbers game, I guess.
Uh-huh.
With
Okay.
Yeah, because if you're so kind of outcome oriented, like let's say it was the first truck driver that I flagged down who stopped,
Hmm.
right? But it could have been the third. But I knew basically like what, there's a 10% chance, and
Uh-huh.
so like it's either this person or it's going to be one of the next nine
Yeah.
people, right? You're just kind of playing the numbers a lot, and it's kind of funny. Remember, if you remember, like pickup artists and stuff were like really popular in like 2007, 8, 9, 2006 maybe.
Yeah.
And that's
Mhm.
what they kind of said. They were just like it's just a numbers game and you can't pre-commit like your feelings ahead of time, right? So it's more this is like a strategy that doesn't work if you're trying to get the one.
Uh-huh. Right.
Where you're
Yeah.
like there's just one person. It's more a
Yeah.
strategy for like if you want to like I guess be what do they say? Hitting out of your league, shooting out of your league. What's the verb there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
whatever it is.
Yeah,
Like
I
if
know
you
what you
want
mean.
to, yeah, if you want to be kind of like getting desirable people that normally you're not getting. I think that pickup artistry strategy works, and for that reason, it's just a numbers game. You know, you will find eventually.
Hmm.
And if you're like willing to just be like, I'm not emotionally connected until something happens, then you
Hmm.
can just go through like hundreds of them or whatever, right?
Right.
So I don't know why people kind of get emotionally connected, but I actually think, imagine this, you are emotionally connected. Now, what can you do? So this is what I mean. Like I guess you have to have like multiple strategies and be able to like recognize when you want to use one or the other. Like you can achieve a similar result though. Again, that's super outcome orientation, right? Was the first one. That's the pickup artist. And then process orientation would be like, I'm just going to be myself because I want to be in a relationship in which I can be myself. And if I'm just being myself 100% of the time, and not worried about at all what the other person's thinking about me, like just so focused on being myself, and the person does vibe on that,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
then that's like just a way to kind of filter out anybody who wouldn't want to be around you being yourself. But why don't that sounds easy enough, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why don't more people try that tactic, which I think works really well? That's what I've done. You know,
Mhm.
that's how I have my current girlfriend. And it's
Yeah.
really nice because it's like, no, I've always just been like, no, I'm gonna keep being myself and you can either kind of like it or lump it. And there are times in which she's like, no, you need to change or whatever. And I'm like, no, like this is me or who I want to be at least. And so like you can like it or lump it. And then she's adjusted. So it's like you end up getting everything you want. I think kind of with that. Why do people not like that? I think because they don't feel comfortable being themselves is my guess. And the reason why they don't feel comfortable being themselves is because they don't have a sense that it's okay to be themselves, probably because of a feeling of insecurity or lack of self worth. When really it's kind of like I mean, like as cheesy as it sounds, you're the only person that's you. And if you're not going to be you, then nobody else is going to be you. And you're kind of just like dropping the ball then for
Mhm.
the rest of society if you're not going to be you, because like we need your unique whatever, your
Mhm.
unique. I mean, whenever you see something that you admire, you're like I love Rick and Morty, right? The
Mhm.
TV show. I'm
Uh-huh.
like, this is so weird.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But I'm just
Yeah.
glad that somebody did do it, you know, or
Mhm.
like Adam's Family Values, you know, or Very Brady's
Yeah.
sequel. You know, you're just kind of
Uh-huh.
glad that somebody did it, and you can just be like happy, even if something's not for me.
Mhm.
And I often like learn little life lessons. It seems from like my nieces and nephews. One of my nieces, her mom was a professional artist, and so I was like, wow, this is great. You know, she's also probably going to become like a professional artist about this particular thing. And then my niece was like, nah, that's not for me. Like at three, 3 or 4, like when you should have been
Uh-huh.
training her, you
Yeah.
know, in this
Uh-huh.
particular performance art. She's like, no, that's not for me.
Yeah.
And she's just always been like that. And I like, good for her
Mhm.
because
Uh-huh.
yeah, she never felt kind of like the pressure to kind of conform to something that wasn't actually like her true passion or a thing that she felt centered doing. And it reminds me, man, what was the movie? It was about ballerinas, center stage or something. There was one dancer who was like really good, and then the other one scrappy dancer who wasn't good but was trying to break into like the American ballet school or something. And the I remember, I mean, this was like probably 2005, 6, 7, 8. I don't know why I keep
Black
referencing this
Swan?
era.
You're talking
No,
about
no,
Black?
not Black Swan.
Yeah.
No, it was more like kind of like teen dancers trying to make it,
Oh,
you know.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Step Up or something like that.
Could have been Step Up
Yeah.
or yeah, except the ballet version of Step Up, whatever that movie
Oh,
was.
okay.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember.
Yeah, so there
Okay.
was like this rich
Mhm.
girl who had been taking ballet lessons since she was like 2 or whatever, and
Mhm.
she was really good, but she ends up quitting, and she's like, I want to do something that I actually care about for a change instead of just something that I'm good at, that I happen to be good at. And I thought that was like really interesting because it's like often I feel like we feel a pressure to do something just because we're good at it.
Right.
Like I should date this person because they're super attractive, and everybody will think, like, wow, I can't believe you're dating this person. When you actually don't like that person. Like I
Right.
feel like that happens a lot with trophy wives, where I'm like, do you, person who has gotten this trophy spouse, do you actually care about the trophy spouse, or do you just care about the way it makes you look? And if you just care about the way it makes you look to have a trophy spouse, then I just feel sorry for those people because,
Mhm.
like, wow, do you make any of your own choices
Right.
that aren't like almost entirely influenced by like what you think people will, think of you?
Yeah.
So I think in some ways it's like just better to think of that like, why, why would you care how something looks to another person? But I know it's hard, and that's why I think it's just so important to be like 100% process oriented, like 100% you, 100% of the time about it, because then you'll never go wrong. Like, and even this video I was watching. Maybe I'll try to like remember to put the link in that I was telling you about, where they're talking about not being triggered. One of the things that they say that they do when they're trying not to be kind of nervous or focus on certain things, like let's say, having to speak in public again. So instead of thinking about themselves and the way that they look as they're speaking in public, or thinking about like how they're being perceived by the people that they're speaking to, they intentionally think about the outcome, which is like, I'm going to think instead about what these people need. What do they need to
Mhm.
hear? Think about them, think about like what is their background, what are the things they might be interested in. And so just being able to shift that focus away from you uh, is, I think, important, but also I think it's just as effective to just keep the focus entirely on you. But you can't have that in between. You can't have like half of the focus on you, half of it on other people. That's the thing that doesn't work. You kind of have to shift it entirely on you and be like very process oriented, or you have to shift the attention entirely on them and be very outcome orientation. If you start kind of letting other stuff sneak in, it's bad. So one thing, I was a music major. One thing that my teacher said, my studio instructor said, I think, was that you cannot perform at the same time that you're evaluating. Like your brain cannot
Mm.
do it essentially. And so you cannot be like, oh, that was a mistake. You have to just be so hyper focused on like, in that moment, I am playing the correct note the way I want it to be, right? You can't think about a split second ago that was a mistake, because that's evaluation, and any energy and kind of brain power that's going to the evaluation is taking away from the performance, and you can always evaluate later. And I think that's kind of another thing that has helped me is, I'm a very need to know person, just kind of naturally curious, I think.
Mhm.
Sometimes I've said truth seeker. What I mostly mean is I just like to know the answers to things. And I like to know things about other people too, like what's the nature of this relationship? Like, does
Mhm.
she enjoy having sex with him? Like like all these little questions. I used to get in trouble as a little kid, you can imagine,
Mhm. Yeah.
having all these different questions that were like so very personal often, that they would be inappropriate.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things in your book, and I've seen some of the other interviews too that I really related to, and that's why I'm like, what's going on here? Because I don't feel like I am, but there's so many things like just exactly what you just said right there.
Hmm.
Um, I want to know those
Yeah.
things. I'm always curious about stuff, and I am absolutely 100% guilty of asking too personal of questions or oversharing
Hmm.
in other situations. So
So
I'm like, what is going on here? Am I on this weird sliding spectrum? Like, what's going on?
yeah, so I would say that that isn't necessarily
Mhm.
an exclusively psychopathic trait, although I think
Right.
it's pretty common, I think, with psychopaths. I think it's one of the reasons why, like, my kind of thought on this is like, have you ever seen like a river and you're like, why does it bend in these weird ways or something? But
Yeah.
you're like, it must have just hit a rock and then like veered off to the right, right
Yeah.
there. And then once it veered off to the right, it was never going to go back to like
Uh,
before, to where it might have been if there was no rock, right? So like
Yeah.
so many stuff kind of happens like by chance or whatever, but it's because there's underlying rocks that happen to be there. So if you have like this kind of need to know, I do think that
Hmm.
that is like a rock that tends to push you towards psychopathy as a personality disorder, as opposed to one of the other personality disorders, you know.
Hmm.
So that's kind of how my theory is. Like you'll get a personality disorder, and then the particular one you get kind of is based on your genetics and some of your like
Yeah.
hardwired predispositions.
Uh,
Yeah, but
well, that's
so
what I got here. I needed to know. I needed
yeah,
to.
that's why you're here. You need
Yeah.
to know. I'm glad too because
Yeah.
I'm especially glad we share this in common because I think it will be easier to talk to you about certain things and you could push back on certain things and be like, that's not enough or whatever. So one of the things that I have kind of like formed as a belief that like maybe like a little bit uh I don't know, difficult to kind of classify in terms of beliefs is that if there's certain things that are uh if there's certain things that are inherently you, you will be able to find a natural and fulfilling expression of those things. Like it I have never like I've worried that that's not true and it's never not been true, I guess. So what do I kind of mean by that? Like one of my favorite quotes is from Eric Liddell, who was a runner in the UK. I forget now if he was Scottish. I think he was. And he was also like a Christian missionary, like in the 1920s, I think, right? So he has the Chariots of Fire is the
Hmm.
movie that's based on his
Okay.
life, which I just barely watched because it was
Uh-huh.
on HBO leaving soon. So I was like, all right, let's
Oh.
watch this finally. And then he says, like a quote, I'm going to butcher it. He's talking to his sister, and he's like, yeah, sure, God, and we need to dedicate our life to God. And like my purpose is to like serve God, but he's like, also though, God made me really fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. And I don't think you need to necessarily be religious to kind of think like,
Hmm.
hey, the way that you are, like the specific way that you are, has a role to play, has a position to fill in
Hmm.
life. Like, what else is the meaning of and purpose of you, if not
Yeah.
to just be who you are,
Yeah.
right? So I often feel like if you have this need to know and you have like run into problems before with it being fulfilled, and you expressing that particular aspect of your identity, like you don't need to worry. Nobody needs to worry about like anything that's truly an aspect of their identity because you will find a way to kind of fulfill it. For me, the way that I have kind of fulfilled like this need to know is like I will just reflect on it later. So in the moment I'll be doing things, but then later I'll be like I'll allow myself like during hours of insomnia or sometimes during meditation or other times on vacation and just kind of reflect and just be like, I'm just going to ask my personal intuition these questions like, does she enjoy having sex with him?
Right. Right. Right.
Right, and I'll just kind of like take like an hour or two to just like quietly reflect on it, but I don't I guess the way to put it is I don't think that like it is a little bit compartmentalized. Like remember I told you you either have to be entirely focused on you and your pure self-expression, like very process oriented, I'm just going to be me,
Hmm.
100% me, or you have to be really outcome oriented and focus on the other person, the effect, the whatever. And not just like you can't evaluate the effect while it's happening, right? Because you can't do the evaluation and the performing at the same time. And that's why, it's easier to do the process orientation, just be you more consistently. It's harder to do the outcome, but I still do the outcome in certain circumstances, like I need to get this flight changed, and so I'm going to
Right.
talk to this person. And so I'm going to be like, do whatever it takes to kind of get the flight changed. There are still instances in which I'm like, no, this is I I am going to be entirely focused on them and what they need to hear from me in
Uh-huh.
order to
Uh,
be able to help me to do the thing that needs to happen.
I bet
Um,
you're really good at that.
Yeah, I probably from years of practice. Like, so I've like mentioned in other videos that until, again, about a decade ago, around the time of the book, that's exclusively what I did. Like, I
Mhm.
never made a choice from a place of like self-expression and I'm just going to be 100% me. It was always whatever. So I got so good at kind of predicting people's behavior and stuff. And I do think you can get better. I mean, I think you can like read books, you can become more aware of people, but it's kind of funny because like the true enemy of all this again is like worrying what other people think about you. Like never once in this whole conversation that we've had have I
Uh-huh.
been like, and there's a benefit to worrying what other people think about you. No, it's never. I've told you multiple times, like, you can't do it if you're process orientated and like 100% you. You can't worry about it. Nor can you do it if you're outcome oriented. You can't like worry about what other people think about you. And I've told you specifically that like you have to like banish the thought from your mind. And like the only time you can sort of entertain it is like in these, quiet moments of you alone on the beach or in bed or on an airplane, a long flight, or whatever else it is, in which you can just kind of allow yourself to muse
Mhm.
on like, oh, I wonder if they were like, surprised that I was able to do that or whatever. You can only do it like days later or whatever, if that's something that you still care to know, which it obviously is for me. That I love to. I used to not like insomnia, and now I'm like, oh, now just some quiet moments to think about all these questions that I've put off, like intentionally put off, and been like, I'm not going to think about it. So it does require a lot of self-discipline, I
Mhm.
guess. I think is like the way to put it, because you can't ever, unless you're like in these quiet moments,
Mhm.
ever think about what people think about you, because it's just so useless,
Yeah.
and like not just useless but harmful. Like it has zero benefit, and like, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you like to think about it, in that moment? Probably not. It's just like this terrible habit that you've picked up,
Mhm.
like people who like I don't know, do really disgusting things in public. Like, if you can just look at it that way, like, wow, why am I doing this weird, crazy thing? Something that like you normally would never do because it like doesn't make any sense. I think
Yeah.
it's best to think about it that way, is to really understand and to feel, not just understand it in your brain, but to feel like this is like toxic to think about what other people think of me.
Mhm.
It doesn't help them, it doesn't help me, it makes me a bad person, like there's no value to it. It doesn't matter. People will either love me for who I am, or they won't. So that, this is kind of a good, maybe philosophical thing to do. I just talked about this with, now I'm forgetting the podcast. I'll really try to do this one, but let me look real quick on Twitter. What is this guy's
It
name?
reminds me of Stoicism.
Oh yeah, yeah. Stoicism can help out a lot. Oh yeah, Christopher Lockheed, is that his name?
Oh.
Yeah,
Hmm.
podcast. What is his podcast called?
Oh, I listened to that. I heard you on
Okay,
there.
okay.
Yeah, it was great.
Uh-huh. Uh,
You know what I find interesting about this is that what you're saying and what I'm hearing is, and I kind of knew this, but self-consciousness is a form of self-centeredness,
yes.
which is selfishness. And interestingly enough, we're living in a world where everyone's like talking about how great it is to be an empath. People refer to themselves as empaths and all of this stuff. And that people are like the bad people are sociopaths. Yet sociopaths are the ones that are not thinking about themselves. They're thinking about other people. They're thinking about their outcome focus, and it's kind of, there's irony in that.
Yeah, I mean, like to be fair, like the often the sociopaths are outcome oriented for outcomes that are best for them.
That's true.
In fact,
Some people,
exclusively, well,
yeah,
some might say.
yeah, yeah. But I think the thing that is most interesting to me about sociopathy, psychopathy, which I need definitions on actually, because I've heard people say that they're not the same thing and that they are the same thing. We'll come back to that. But there's the thing that's interesting to me most about it, and that attracts me to it the most, is what you were just talking about, like
Yeah.
real raw authenticity. It's like the real definition of authenticity: 100% yourself with no apologies whatsoever, because they're not needed.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just a little side note about, so yeah, like psychopaths are no angels, but nor are empaths.
Yeah,
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 empaths. I'm always thinking, and
yeah.
I've said it probably multiple times, but I'm like, are you not just making things about yourself?
Hmm.
Somebody's sad, and so you're gonna be sad too.
Yeah,
Like what?
yeah,
What a weird reaction.
yeah, yeah.
And you think that's better for you
Mhm.
to also be sad, for you to
Uh-huh.
make this about you somehow?
Yeah.
And your feelings or whatever? Like you need to also be sad in order to care about
Uh-huh.
this. You can't just care for ethical reasons or other
Uh-huh.
reasons. You have
Uh-huh.
to almost like this is like people who are like I know people who are bad with money or whatever. So then they intentionally forget the password to their bank accounts or something. That's what it always seems like to me, is that you guys don't trust yourself enough to care about your fellow human beings unless you're also feeling their emotions allegedly. Like
Right, right,
it
right.
seems like real, like, wow, you
Uh-huh.
wouldn't care, yeah, unless you were like you also are crying.
Right.
Like I still care and I
Right.
don't cry. Like you guys
Mhm.
can't trust yourselves.
I almost think it's I
Yeah,
almost think it's predatory and kind of oh gosh, why am I drawing a blank here?
like a little parasitic
Parasitic,
about, yeah,
exactly.
people's kind
Parasitic.
of
Yeah, yeah,
emotions
yeah.
where you're like,
Oh, you're
huh.
sad? Let me be sad too, so we can both get sympathy from other people together.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it seems a little. See, I mean, I don't obviously understand it well, so I'll put that caveat and not say, but like if people think that it's weird to not feel empathy, I'm just telling you, to
Yeah.
people who don't experience empathy, it's real weird to think that you guys do, and that you
Right.
think so highly of it and think so
Uh-huh.
highly of yourselves for all of it, because I don't know what it actually gets them. But yeah, so the Christopher Lockheed thing, I think this gets kind of, you're right. Stoicism is a great source for a lot of these things. And like Marcus Aurelius,
Yeah.
he's my bro or whatever. I love some of his quotes. Basically I love everything he says. He's a great thinker, and it's crazy too that he was like the most powerful man in the world
Mhm.
for his time, but
Yeah.
still struggled, like I think people often think if I just get to this level, then I won't struggle. And here
Right.
he is, most powerful man in the world, and still had these struggles and still had to kind of like, work through these things and like use some self-discipline to not just let himself go down, a spiral of self-doubt and
Mhm.
self-consciousness, etc. But yeah, at the end of the Christopher Lockheed podcast, he was like, a lot of people trash you online talking about me, right? And like, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you not let it bother you or whatever else? And I think like for this, it's really good to just kind of understand the nature of personal boundaries,
Mhm.
which again is like something I talk about like in the book. Like, here are the basics of like just understanding your reality that are
Mhm.
really going to help kind of become the foundation for some of these concepts and putting these concepts into practice, is that everybody has the right to their own beliefs, right? And sometimes that may seem, if that feels bad to you, like to you, Tony, or to anybody who else is thinking, like maybe kind of explore why that feels bad to you. Like, because I see it all the time online. I just saw it today. There was somebody was talking, express some whatever belief, and they're like, oh, she has the right to her beliefs. No, not when they impact others. And I was like, in what way do they impact others? Like, I always think that it's funny when people are like, but that's a dangerous belief. And I'm like, oh, is it dangerous? In what
Uh-huh.
way? Like, do we need to call 911?
Yeah.
that belief is so dangerous. We got to call
Yeah.
911. It's just
Yeah.
weird that people are like, no, everyone has the right to their beliefs if they're the correct belief. But that's not true.
Mhm.
Everybody has the right to their beliefs. And I'll tell you how and why I know this is because you can't change people's beliefs. That's just reality. So it's just
Yeah.
accepting
Yeah.
reality to
Yeah.
accept that everybody, like, you want to believe your own things, probably, right?
Mhm.
So does everybody else, right? And so Christopher Lockheed was kind of asking me, hopefully I'm saying his name correctly, was asking me like, how do you deal with this? And I kind of like, and this is my true mental state about things. Like I just put whatever stuff into the world that I feel like is me now, like very process oriented, and then everybody else gets the right to choose if they
Right.
like it or not.
Yeah. Huh?
And like why would I want to interfere with that? That's the other thing about self-consciousness. Like if you're so worried, for instance,
Hmm.
about making a good impression, that is manipulation. And by the way,
Yes.
that's the reason why I don't do outcome orientation anymore, is because I'm almost like, however many years sober from
Mhm.
manipulation.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
After I used to do it exclusively, and now I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm not going to do it. And
Mhm.
so I don't do it at all, basically, unless it's for like, I need to get these flights changed. Or sometimes in the
Yeah.
law.
Yeah.
Sometimes as a
Yeah.
lawyer, I have to like turn some screws or whatever,
Right.
right? But for the most part, I just am me 100% of the time. I just like to focus on that because like you kind of worrying about what impression you're making on other
Mhm.
people is always going to lead to you manipulating. And
Yes.
it gets back to a little bit like what we were talking about with like, relationships and stuff. Is like, why does it work to be so 100% the one way or the other? Like pickup artist, like 100% outcome and just playing the numbers, or 100% yourself, process orientation, and they can like it or lump it. Why do those seem to work so much better than any blend of the two?
Right.
Right. And I think the reason why is because the one is like 100% kind of overt manipulation, and the other zero. If you're kind of self-consciously like even kind of dressing to impress, can be manipulation, right? Isn't it? You're
Mhm.
trying to like make a good impression and stuff. Instead, if you were like process orientated, you might be like, I really consider this person to be important and valuable to me, and I want to adequately express those feelings in the choices that I make, in the way that I treat them, and in the way that I interact with them, and the way that I appear to them, so that I'm expressing to them, hey, you are important to me,
Right.
right? Rather than like, I hope like my ass looks pretty good in the
Right.
like, I'm going to try to lure this person in with, whatever. Yeah, is manipulative, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think being self-conscious, like we've talked about like everything has trade-offs except self-consciousness,
Mhm.
which is all bad. There's not a single good part about it. And
Yeah.
people who try to make other people feel self-conscious by, for instance, like commenting negatively on their appearance or their performance,
Mhm.
I think those people belong in like, what is it, the ninth circle of hell or whatever?
Uh-huh.
Because self-consciousness is so bad anyways,
Mhm.
right? And that you're actually trying to induce others to
Mhm.
feel self-conscious. Like, are you some sort of monster? Right? Like,
Mhm.
I really think that is bum
Yeah.
toilet behavior. And I will call people out on it all the time. People be like, oh, nobody wants to see Amy Schumer in a wet t-shirt. You know what? Toilet. That comment is
Mhm.
toilet. Are you trying to get Amy Schumer to feel self-conscious? And
Uh-huh.
why?
Uh-huh.
Why do you think this is valuable to society? That society wants to hear your take on Amy Schumer? Like, you can have your take, that's your choice or whatever, but obviously trying to like put it out there as, like, hey, Amy Schumer should be like self-conscious about the way she looks. Nah, she's not going to, because self-consciousness sucks and there's no value to it. No social value, no personal value, no any sort of value. So I often think that. I think it's so invaluable, or like unvaluable,
Mhm.
like lacking in value, self-consciousness, that I intentionally am careful to not induce self-consciousness in others, because I want them to just feel comfortable being around me and in the moment, and I don't want them going to a weird place in their head in which they're like now also thinking about like the way that they're being perceived by others. Honestly, too, like you've heard it maybe, Tony,
Mhm.
about psychopaths and sex. Like, are they good or not good about sex?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Are they good lovers? And ask yourself, does self-consciousness belong in any sexual expression? Is it valuable there? Wow. I
Yeah.
mean, here's
Yeah.
here's the thing. Like, I still don't understand, but definitely didn't understand kind of like maybe until recently. What what is the joke that you see on TV about let's turn the lights out for sex? Like, I didn't understand that joke. I was
Oh,
like, what?
right. Uh-huh.
Why
Right.
do you turn the lights out? Are you
Mhm.
saving on your electricity bill?
Oh, wow.
Like, I did
That's
not get
incredible.
it. Did not
Yeah.
get it because it was
Yeah.
so far from any of my own experiences, sexual
Yeah.
experiences,
Yeah.
in which it's like always, honestly speaking of outcome and process, again, it's either like I'm just total self-expression, or it's like, hey, here's the outcome, like I want to make you feel good, and so here's what we're doing. But
Mhm.
because, like I value you and want you to have this experience or whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just another example of where it's self-consciousness is particularly just like, I mean, like a weed, a pernicious
Yeah.
weed that grows in so many areas of our life, but at least in terms of sexual expression, I think can be so uh, like invasive.
Mhm.
I just went to Hawaii and they're always talking about like these invasive species. They brought
Uh-huh.
like
Yeah.
cow's weed or something there, and now it just grows everywhere and it sucks because
Yeah.
it's like choking out all the life of everything else, right? And so
Yeah.
yeah, it is an invasive weed, self-consciousness. And if we can just like see it that way and kind of be like, I don't want to be self-conscious, nor do I think that anybody else should. And if people are trying to impose self-consciousness on me, that's wrong way, and I'm just going to put up like immediately a boundary, then I think that that's probably like in a sentence
Mhm.
everything that's nice about the way that psychopaths are with regard to self-consciousness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not lost. I mean, I knew to begin with that, um, self-consciousness is based in, self-centeredness. It's
Mhm.
just what's interesting is when I personally feel like I'm in it, I'm not seeing it that way. I'm seeing it like I'm being, um, but reframing it that way, what
Mhm.
you were just talking about, really kind of really helped me see things a little bit differently.
Well, finish
Um,
that thought. When you're in it,
but
what does it feel like? Why does it feel like, okay, this is like a worthwhile thing to be in right now? Like, why are you like, sure? Do you feel like a pressure to do it? Do you feel like you're being too arrogant if you don't, or do you feel like you're not being like adhering to the social contract enough, or like what is?
I think it's like, I will go in. It's very similar. I go into a situation sometimes and will, put a number valuation on everything that's going on in this room, and then I have to kind of, you know, uh, embody some sort of level of value. You know what I mean? I
Okay.
have to bring my value up or down. It's like the opposite, I think, of what a sociopath does, which is look at the values of everybody else and
Mhm.
determine who's the most valuable. Okay, I'm going to use this situation. I go into a situation and determine my own value, and then
Yeah.
try to adjust my value uh, based on everything else. And so, yeah, that's what it feels like. It's like, oh shit, I got to make sure I say the right thing, do the right thing. And this doesn't happen all the time. It's just like, it's something that happens enough that I was thinking to myself, if I could do the opposite of that,
Uh-huh.
if I could embody the opposite of that all the time. And what I'm hearing you saying is that allowing myself to be 100% authentic is actually, it's like a gift to not to myself, but to everybody else.
To everybody else. Yes,
Yeah.
because then you're also telling them you can be the same to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh. But so let's kind of think about like, okay, like back up. You said a couple things about like, okay, psychopath sees value. So I should say, kind of make a distinction. There's like your personal self-worth, which is like immeasurable, right? And
Right.
then even psychopaths, let's say in the moment, if I'm talking to Stacy from like Southwest Airlines,
Right.
right? You
Yeah.
know, Stacy and I, this is probably it for us in this life. This phone
Right. Right.
conversation, right? I don't have any opinion about Stacy's self-worth. Even
Right.
if she says, I'm sorry, I can't do that for you today or whatever. I'm not like, oh, you're a bad person. What, you know, like
Right.
I
Yeah.
just think she was not valuable to me in this interaction. Like
Yeah.
in this interaction, she was not helpful, and I will
Right.
respond as such on the survey. You
Yeah.
know that
Yeah.
I'm going to spend time 5 minutes doing 5 minutes of my
Uh-huh.
time on this like after call survey, right? But I don't have any opinion about her value as a person or her overall. She's probably
Mhm.
like, I don't know,
Right. Yeah.
like a pillar of her community. Who knows?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
or she's not, but she's still like a lovely person or whatever. Like I have zero opinion. And that's the other thing that's kind of nice about a psychopath is they can be like, okay, what you said to me right now, about like how to get to the airport was not helpful because,
Uh-huh.
we have a flat tire. So, we got to
Right.
resolve this first or whatever, right? Like I can just be like, that person was not helpful in this
Mhm.
situation without kind of making any sort of like further extrapolation as to
Right.
their worth in all of life, their worth as a human being,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of nice is that psychopaths will just be like, okay, you're not helpful. I will just quickly move on. There's
Uh-huh.
no
Yeah.
judgment or moral judgment or kind of value
Right.
judgment, no hierarchy of
Yeah.
humanity
Yeah.
in a psychopath's mind. Whereas
Yeah.
I think in normal people's minds, sometimes there is like where they're like, no, you are
Yes.
worth less because you have these political beliefs, or you
Yeah.
are worth less
Right.
because, you have done X behavior or whatever, where
Yeah.
I'm just like, it's funny, like dudes posting their wins is like a Twitter account. Like if my insomnia is particularly bad and I've gone through all my normal ones,
Hmm.
sometimes I'll just like scroll through that feed to until I fall asleep.
What is it
But
called?
dudes posting their wins, normally it's like real like heartwarming and you're like perfect for like insomnia when you're really
Uh-huh.
just you don't know if you're going to go to sleep in a minute or 10 minutes, so you're just scrolling through
Uh-huh.
the feed.
Uh-huh.
But there's like a
Uh-huh.
5% of the posts are about dudes killing the rapists of their daughters. And I'm always like, wow,
Wow.
this is a weird theme to
Uh-huh.
this account. And everybody supports it. Everybody's like, yep, he deserved to die or whatever. And I'm like, even this is a
Wait, this is
controversial
a real
take.
thing? These are guys posting
Hmm. Yeah,
that,
yeah.
that they
People
actually
come out of jail, be like, yeah, I've served my time for killing the rapist of my daughter or whatever, but I have no, regrets. And yeah, it's on
Wow.
dudes posting their wins. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, probably
Okay.
yeah, whatever, 20th, 30th post is about.
Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh. I'm
Yeah, uh-huh.
following that immediately.
Yeah, it's interesting, but it's like normal people who have empathy and stuff, like they're
Mhm.
like, yeah, kill the rapist or whatever. But I'm like,
Right, right,
well,
right.
isn't all human life valuable? Isn't that why we care so much about the rapist? Is
Yeah,
because they have like damaged beyond repair the
yeah,
human life of another?
yeah,
Isn't that why we care? But people are so quick to kind of be like, nah,
yeah.
this human life is not valuable,
Right.
where
Yeah,
I don't go there
yeah,
in my
yeah,
mind, and I don't know any psychopath that does, right? So that's like another good thing about psychopaths is we don't have like this hierarchy of value for human life where some's like real valuable and some of it's basically not at all
uh-huh,
valuable.
right.
So yeah, like to understand that your performance, like you say, you go into a room and they're expecting something. Now I'll give you an example of something. I used to do swimming lessons, right? And I do expect, I guess I anticipate that the parents of the children who are, signing up for my swimming lessons want their kids to learn how to swim. That's the whole point,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
if I show up to work and I'm like, and now we're playing Scrabble or Connect Four, like
Right.
I do think that people would be like, we do not appreciate this,
Yeah.
right? So there is something to be said about like, yeah, you obviously have to be in reality a little bit about like, but that's what I kind of mean. Like, you can adopt these roles, these kind of temporary roles in which you consent. You consent to be like a particular thing. Like, as an attorney, I consent to be kind of, the problem solver or the bulldog or the person who's just going to keep calling this person until like something happens, or the person who's, filed the litigation, or the person, right? Like, just like your dentist consents to be the person who's just like, hey, got any summer plans?
Right. Right.
Right? While they're like
Yeah.
looking at your x-rays,
Mhm.
right? Like, it's okay to use and kind of use people when they're consenting this way. And when you have consented to be used in a particular way, I think it's totally fine to play basically a role,
Yeah.
like 100% you 100% of the time.
Hmm.
But it's not to say that you're not, like, in certain aspects, like if I showed up to the swimming lessons and I'm like, let me tell you about my worst breakup,
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
6-year-olds,
Yeah.
it's like, so that I'm not saying like, like radical whatever authenticity all the time. I guess I'm just saying like, you are choosing
Yeah.
to kind of do these things, and like you're also choosing to be inauthentic sometimes, to be people pleasy in
Absolutely.
instances in which that's not at all what's being asked of you.
Yeah.
Nobody's asking
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
on your first date to be people pleasy and inauthentic. They
Mhm.
actually probably prefer to see the real you. That's what the whole point is. They're going to feel tricked if you like
Yeah.
show up being inauthentic. So I
Yeah.
think that's kind of an interesting thing too, is realizing nobody's asking you to be self-conscious and to be like overly paranoid. And if you ever have a question that's what's being asked of you, you can just ask. So you can go into a room and be like, hey, do you guys need me to just be kind of like real positive right now and just like be, kind of a cheerleader about this project? Or are you okay hearing some of my true concerns?
That's very interesting because I end up in that situation all the time where I'm wondering, do they want me to just, yeah, be a cheerleader, or do you want my real opinion? And that's really interesting to go in and actually just like, hey, what do you want from me right now? To
Yeah,
actually just straight up ask,
because
do you
I
want me
think,
to pat you on the back or do you want to hear the truth?
yeah, I think
Or
we so often assume either way. We
yeah,
assume
yeah,
people
yeah,
want to hear our take, and they do not. They don't
yeah,
want to hear our input. They don't
yeah,
want to hear our thoughts, our spicy take on it. Or we think the opposite. We think, oh, okay, I just need to cheerlead this person, and they don't want that. So I think often we are kind of like opting into weird artificial roles, and like it's like, it doesn't surprise me that people would feel self-conscious if they're like, if they've opted into a weird
mhm,
artificial role. I would feel self-conscious too. I'd
yeah.
feel self-conscious if I was like, and now I'm going to pretend, to be a farmer at this like ranch hands association. Right?
Right.
I might be a little bit self-conscious if I felt like I was so far out of my feelings of authenticity or whatever,
Huh?
that I was just playing like this role that just, seemed really fake to me. So I
Yeah.
think that's like another important thing to kind of flag, is sometimes our self-consciousness comes because we're trying to kind of be fit a particular role that may or may not be even what's being asked of you.
Right. But most of the time it's a self-imposed thing. Like
Yes.
I'm not even coming to people with like, what do you want me to be? I'm just like trying to evaluate where I'm supposed to fit into the situation and then put on that mask and
Mhm.
become that thing. And that's not authentic. And it's really interesting because there's a part of my my subconscious that is thinking that to be self-conscious is to be really concerned about my well-being, and which is probably where it's mostly inspired by. However, it is I'm really keying in on how self-centered and how manipulative and how aggressive that is.
Mhm.
Um, Interesting. I don't know. Just talking to you kind of just changed my, I guess, perception of where that's coming from for me
Yeah.
anyway. Uh,
Yeah. trying to think if there's anything. I'm really curious. I would like
Yeah,
to. I'll give you like a little bit of a homework assignment.
please. Yeah,
I'll give you a
yeah.
homework assignment. And then I heard this in like some communication CDs. They were like, disappointment comes from, like, I think a lot of us fear disappointing people.
Hmm.
Like even psychopaths probably like fear that to a certain extent if we really care about the person, right? But the communications like audiobook was like disappointment comes only from unmet expectations, right?
Uh-huh.
And the idea of the communication audiobook was you just need to express all expectations. Like there should be no hidden expectations, unspoken expectations. You need to always speak them. And I think that that's something that like does not seem obviously connected to the
Uh-huh.
experience of self-consciousness, but is actually really, I think, key. So the homework assignment I'm going to give you is
Uh-huh.
to be aware of all of your expectations, and every time you notice one, to express it to the other person, and to ask the other person whenever you kind of like feel like you're cluing into an unexpressed expectation that they have of you, to ask them, be like, hey, were you thinking it would be most helpful for me to just like go out and grab lunch for all of us? you know or like whatever it is, but instead of just kind of like assuming that they
Yeah.
didn't want you there, they wanted you like running an errand instead, just ask them. So ask your things like, actually, like your unexpressed expectations, like, actually right now I don't want your input. I just want to kind of vent for a moment and speak out loud. Is that okay with you? Get their consent, obviously.
Right.
So express your own expectations, and then if you feel like others have an expectation of you that's been unexpressed, then to express them, and then to notice when expectations do get expressed, and maybe kind of like keep a little journal, and then we'll meet back up in a little bit and
Okay.
see what you've learned.
Yeah, absolutely. So be aware of my expectations and
Yeah, express them all.
express them all.
And every time you feel like you may or may not be picking up on unexpressed expectations of others, ask them.
Ask about
Just
them.
be like, hey, is this an expectation of yours?
Right.
Hmm.
Okay. That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah, I know when things are like yeah. Um, I can imagine my palms sweating in this situation. It's gonna
Hmm.
take effort to do some some of these things. It's great.
So even though I
I
will
love it.
say this too, like it's often easiest to do it in situations in which you do not know the person, you're not going to see them again. So
Hmm.
like think about like online things
Hmm.
that like things that ways that you might be able to express that, or like in line, for instance, at Starbucks or something. Like, hey, is your expectation that I go stand over here and wait for my name to be called? It'd be hilarious to even say that. Like on stupid things where
Yeah.
you're like, yeah, no, I'm pretty sure that is their expectation. Still say it. Still say
Okay.
it. And then just to practice it, like extreme expression of expectations.
Yeah. Well, I'm about to head to an event actually, yeah, in
Hmm.
San Diego of all places,
Nice. Uh
uh,
huh.
for 4th of July, where I'm expected to, deliver some information to people, and I gotta,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. Where I
yeah.
have to,
And that's a great instance. Be
yeah,
like, what is your expectation for how long I'm going to talk? What is your
yeah,
expectation for, like what topics I'm going to cover? What is your expectation regarding this, this, and this?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's crazy. Once you kind of understand, once some of these things, these sneaky little things are spoken, that's
yeah,
another thing that's nice about hanging out with a psychopath is they will just tell you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking to myself, I feel like um, psychopaths make amazing therapists because I think sometimes that therapy. People are being mined for dollars over a period of weeks, because
Uh,
he's trying to, ease them along. And
uh-huh.
I think a psychopath might be more like a surgeon, a little cold, a little calculating, a little straight to the point.
Exactly.
Self-centered, passive-aggressive narcissist. Quit being an asshole. You know, be
Yeah.
nice to people, and your life will get better. You know.
Right. And there are trade-offs to everything, like the trade-offs to kind of like asking people their expectations. Some people will see it probably as being a little bit aggressive, right? Some people might be like, "No, I wanted to keep that hidden from you. That way I could trap you into not meeting it."
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Depending on the way that they were raised, that's the too in the communication, like whatever audiobook, they kind of said that. Yeah, depending on what their family kind of dynamic was in terms of their communication, that might be seen as being like an aggressive thing. But you can just be like, even with that, is your expectation that I don't ask you about your expectations? So if you encounter that, then you can always follow up with that. And if they say, yeah, don't ask me, then okay, that person
Right.
doesn't want those
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
questions, right?
yeah.
Respecting, their consent and autonomy and everything, right? But yeah, otherwise ask them because I think a lot of people feel like they want to express their expectations, but feel like that's somehow wrong, because like if you express expectations, it's like it is like you're using people because you're saying, "Hey, I
Yeah.
want you to teach my kids to swim," whereas I'm like, "No, of course you do. That's why they're at swimming lessons." Like it's okay to acknowledge that we use people and expect them to do things. Like, yeah, I do expect you to get me more water at this restaurant when my water's been empty for like 20 minutes, Like that is my expectation, and it's just fine to voice it.
Yeah.
And if they say no, then okay, well, next time I won't come to this restaurant, or I'll drink a lot of water ahead of time, or you can just everybody can plan accordingly.
Yeah.
If you just
Yeah.
understand, like it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you have to meet their expectation, but not, it just means that now that you know them, you can make your own choices in light of that information.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
So we'll do this homework and then I'll check back in. We'll communicate via email. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye. Thanks.
No problem.